and welcome to this Digital Workplace Group webinar. The topic for today is the digital renaissance of work, delivering digital workplaces fit for the future. Today we'll be hearing from authors of the new book, The Digital Renaissance of Work, Digital Workplaces Fit for the Future. The authors are Paul Miller, the CEO of the Digital Workplace Group, and Elizabeth Marsh, the Director of Research for DWG. And today we're actually not talking so much about the book itself as the two core themes from the book, the changing nature of work and digital workplace strategy. If you would like to connect with us and get any comments into the discussion today or questions, you can go through the WebEx Q&A panel or chat panel. Here are a couple of screenshots to let you know how to do that. You can type in your question and we will funnel those in to our presenters today. You can also connect with us via Twitter. The hashtag for the book is DRWBook, and you can follow DWG on Twitter as well. Both of those things will help you connect with us around the book today during this webinar. We also, if you are new to the Digital Workplace Group and you'd like to learn more about what we do, then you can type into the Q&A panel at any time the phrase "more info," and a friendly member of our team, will follow up with you and provide whatever information you need. Now, before we jump into the presentation and discussion today, we'd like to do a quick audience poll. And the poll here, the question is, how would you rate the maturity of your digital workplace strategy? There are about 5 answers ranging from none, the digital workplace strategy is not even a twinkle in our collective eyes, all the way to the advanced level, option number 1, we're implementing a clear vision and roadmap. I'd like to invite all of our audience members today to go ahead and click one of these 5 options, take the poll, and we will review the results shortly. Before we review the results, I'd like to introduce our presenters today. First, I'll let you know a little bit about the Digital Workplace Group. We have 2 main arms of our business, the Member Forum and Consulting Services. The Member Forum is a peer learning, research, and benchmarking forum for generally for large companies to help them improve their intranets and digital workplaces. And our consulting arm provides bespoke consulting projects on all types of things related to strategy, governance, usability, stakeholder engagement, etc., around intranets, mobile apps, HR portals, digital workplace strategy and vision, etc. Our first presenter, Paul Miller, is the founder and CEO of DWG. He founded DWG as the Intranet Benchmarking Forum in 2002, has spent several decades as a technology and social entrepreneur, and really has been at the heart of the technology revolution. The book we're discussing today is his 3rd book, and Paul is, in fact, in the process of writing a 4th book, a novel, with a good friend and journalist based in Hollywood. First off, Paul, thanks so much for being here and welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Ephraim, and thanks very much for inviting me.
Absolutely. I'm really looking forward to today's discussion about the book. But first, you're writing a novel with a friend based in Hollywood. That sounds very exciting. Can you tell me anything about that novel, or is it top secret?
No, it's not top secret. It's a financial thriller set around the banking crisis. And it's an interesting kind of creative pursuit, and it's an interesting experience trying to write with somebody who lives 6,000 miles away.
I can only imagine. Well, I guess that the financial crisis is really embedded in the memory of the generations alive for it, so that seems like a critical point in history that you can tie a novel to.
Sure.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Paul. Our other presenter today is Elizabeth Marsh, Director of Research. She leads the DWG Best Practice Research Program and also works closely with our consulting business. Elizabeth has been an on-the-ground Internet manager at T-Mobile and Reuters, and she's also an accomplished flautist. Elizabeth, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi, Ephraim. Great to be here. Thank you.
And beyond all of those other very interesting things about you, I'm really fascinated about this fun fact. You're a recent convert to barefoot-style running after shunning running for many years. Why did you pick up running now, And why barefoot running?
I read a great book, Born to Run, which really inspired me. And yeah, I've gone from absolutely hating running. I thought it was just like you did when you're late for the plane to, at the end of the day, in the digital workplace, I can get up and just enjoy a really good run.
That's fascinating. I started getting into barefoot style running a while ago, and I absolutely love it. And that same book I read, and it really it helped me make my mind up about it. Well, thanks so much for joining us. Now that we've had a few minutes for our audience members to take the poll, let me just ask, Paul and Elizabeth, where do you think we'll see the average company land on this poll? Where are we today, and what has changed recently?
Well, I think I'd probably expect that most people are in the fair category. I think they're working on it. I don't know if about in earnest. I think some are. But I think it's early stages. The digital workplace feels a little bit like intranets did about 10 years ago. A little bit chaotic, not quite sure where to go, going to be important for the organization. And just looking at the top one, advanced, I'd just like to name check IKEA as being one of the few organizations I've come across who I think are truly implementing a clear vision and roadmap around the digital workplace. So if there's anybody tuned in from IKEA, you are an advanced organization.
Oh, great. Well, let's see if we can have our producer, Cheryl Lesser, go ahead and show the poll results. And it looks like, actually, interestingly enough, Paul, none of the people on our attendees today have listed advanced as their stage. It looks as though fair and poor make up the bulk of the responses, which to me says that we're all in the right place at the right time today.
And I think that aligns with what we saw in our member survey at the end of last year. I think around 16% of those organizations said, we have a formal digital workplace. But at the same time, I think around 50% said, that is one of our strategic priorities this year. So there's a sharp rise that we've seen in that.
So I guess today we're kind of at a turning point, aren't we?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I guess this book has come at a perfect time. Before we talk about this, the new book, Paul, you wrote a book that was published in 2012 called The Digital Workplace, How Technology is Liberating Work. Why did you write this book, and why did you write it back then?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I started writing it in 2010 when I felt that there was a place that we worked that wasn't physical. And it's kind of obvious to sort of state it like that, but we're very used to the physical world of work, but increasingly where we found ourselves working were in digital environments. And I really wanted to try and anchor this new geography of work, the digital workplace, in an old geography of work, if you like, which was the physical world, and to try and contrast that. And the book was really an effort to try and put some detail around what the digital workplace would mean in terms of mobility, flexibility, and cover some of those issues around isolation, addiction, and so on. I think what's been interesting to see in the years since then is how the digital workplace industry has really taken off. You've got organizations like Gartner now having it as part of their hype cycle. You've got most of the major consulting companies like Deloitte, Accenture, Capgemini, with offering digital workplace practices. So I think it's been really encouraging to see the way that the term has developed.
Sure. Yeah. I think this was really one of the first books that talked about the digital workplace. And over the past, 3 years, there's been a huge growth in people talking about it. Even if you look at the Google Trends analysis of the term, it's on a sharp rise and has been for a couple of years now.
Yeah, no, I think that's right.
Well, in regards to the new book, Elizabeth, there are two main parts to the book, and I'm wondering if you can explain the two main parts and explain why the book is broken into these two main sections.
Sure. Well, I mean, as Paul said, a lot has changed since he wrote that first book, and Paul's been researching and evolving his vision of what's happening in the world of work. So he wanted to update and share that vision for people and give that kind of big picture. But on top of that, since Paul wrote the first book as Digital Workplace Group, we've been researching, measuring, benchmarking around digital workplaces. And what really excited me when Paul suggested this was the opportunity to bring together a lot of our thinking around, well, what do you actually do about that big picture within your organization? And there's very practical steps. So you get a combination of the two.
Yeah, and I suppose one of the big differences between maybe intranets and the digital workplace is that the digital workplace is part of this broader, massive social change brought on by the very common use of digital technology in everyday life, whereas intranets always seem just kind of like a piece of what happens within companies, but the digital workplace is tied to this much bigger thing, it seems.
Yeah, and I think that's really an interesting point. I mean, one of the things I say is that intranets are essential, but the digital workplace is transformational. And I think because it brings a kind of freedom and mobility into work. And I think the other interesting thing, you referenced it there, Ephraim, is that the digital workplace really starts to blur what we call inside the organization, the employee-contractor base, into the supply chain, the relationships, the distribution network. And I think we can think of the digital workplace, it might start within the organization, but it then flows outwards, which
Sure.
is, I think, a very exciting part of it.
Yeah. And I know that when we were working on writing the book, Paul, you coined this term digital renaissance to describe the really remarkable time that we're living through. Can you just speak a little bit to that? And also, digital work ethic, what do you mean by those things?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the digital renaissance, again, it's about anchoring new aspects of our lives now in history. And so the idea of the digital renaissance was really to reference the first Renaissance that took place in Italy as the kind of epicenter of that in the late 1400s, 1500s, which was an outpouring of art, creativity, trade, commerce, and the technology innovation was the Gutenberg press, which was the printing press. And the dissemination of books at that time was considered quite threatening, rather like the dissemination of ideas in the internet can be seen quite threatening in sort of challenging institutions. But I think the digital renaissance for me was trying to give some texture and color and atmosphere to all the innovation that we all see happening on a daily basis. The book that really made an impact on me at the beginning of last year was The Second Machine Age by Andrew McAfee, Eric Brynjolfsson, which really talked about the automation, the robotization of work and so on. And I think if that book was about the mechanics of it, the digital renaissance of work is really start to say, well, so what does that mean for us as human beings? What does it mean to live in this remarkable period, which is a digital renaissance? I don't think people in the Middle Ages were walking around going, God, it's terrific to be alive in the Renaissance, isn't it? It's like something in retrospect that you realize. The reference to the digital work ethic was to say that this digital renaissance, for me, the key theme of it is freedom. It's the flowing of freedom through work. And work has traditionally been seen as something that you suffer through, that you do out of duty and obligation. And the kind of term that got applied to it during the Industrial Revolution was the Protestant work ethic. And, don't enjoy what you're doing, just kind of understand that's part of your remit. But the digital workplace is about passion, fulfillment, and kind of expression in work, and the freedom. That isn't to say that all work becomes some kind of play, because I think, and this what we're looking at talks about artists and artisans, who I talk about a lot in the book. Artists and artisans work at their craft. You're a flautist, Elizabeth. Part of being a good flautist is practice. Part of being David Hockney as an artist is a part of practice. So it's not about not having to work hard. It's about a different ethic around it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very rewarding as well. And you also talk about, the need to move on from thinking about the digital worlds that we inhabit as kind of technical, functional spaces, and the need to kind of connect more to the physical world, where we need these beautiful, amazing experiences. So this human-centered digital workplace is something that's really at the heart of the book.
Yeah, and the human-centered digital workplace, for me, is a really critical concept. And it's really saying that in the digital worlds that we live and work in, what is the relationship between the human being and technology? So as the technology gets ever smarter, what is our place? And the vision that I have is that as the Industrial Revolution turned us into efficient machines, the digital renaissance, the digital revolution, has the capacity to turn us back into human beings. Stephen Hawking, featured in the film The Theory of Everything, that won the Oscar for Best Actor on Sunday night, said that the biggest issue facing humanity is the relationship between us as biological species and the technology that we're creating. And will we become subservient to that technology, or will it be there to improve, ameliorate, and enhance the condition of human beings? And for organizations, the question is, what role will human beings play inside your workplace? So that's really a critical question for everybody to ask. And I would think we all would want to place human beings in a key role. The other thing was just to really relate to what I think Steve Jobs understood better than everybody, which is that digital environments can be beautiful. So we gravitate towards beauty in the physical world. Why wouldn't we gravitate towards beauty in the digital world? And why wouldn't we want that in our workplace just as that we want that in the rest of our life?
So as we move towards these amazing digital experiences, what happens to the physical world of work? Is it sort of death of the office, face-to-face meetings not really relevant anymore?
It's interesting. I've kind of gone backwards and forwards on this. When writing the first book and then this book, I tended to feel that offices were in terminal decline, and that physical places that people would come to were in terminal decline. But then I noticed what I referred to as the revenge of the office, as the architectural and world kind of responded by reinventing, refreshing the physical environments. I now feel that organizations like DWG or Automatic, who run WordPress with fully distributed workforces and no offices, are the future of work. Work has left the office, and I don't think it's ever going to fully return there. So work has become mobile. You can work where you want to. And that's not to say that organizations won't own, lease, manage some level of real estate, but it'll only be there as an option. And I really do think that organizations like Facebook and Google that want everybody there are really kind of restricting to quite a limited model by enforcing people to keep coming to the same workplace day in, day out.
It seems like, one of the themes emerging is that we kind of have a lot of these old industrial age practices that are still actually kind of quite prevalent and that we need to question. Does that also hold true for how we think about teams and how we collaborate together?
Well, collaboration's such a kind of key aspect. I mean, it's hard to, when I think about a typical day in my working life, there's so little I do where I'm not collaborating with other people. And it's interesting, again, if we look back to the agricultural agrarian age, where people worked in the land, there were far more fluid, what we might call teamwork. And then in the industrial age, I think we had this very mechanistic, static role for teams. You work with the same group of people in the physical environment. And I think what's happening in the digital renaissance is that teams, that this notion of fluidity is coming back. And so I really think we need to rethink teamwork and think a lot more about different forms of collaboration, and really start rethinking this whole notion of the team.
And that fluidity kind of comes into, you talk about, there are no jobs, but there's lots of work, and kind of the impact and the worries that we have. I know that's not a new thing about jobs, but now given the speed of automation. So kind of how does that work as well?
Well, again, this is another kind of fascinating thing that things change so fast at the moment. I know it's a little bit of a cliche that, but even since when I was writing my section of the book, I was really quite fearful about what the future for work might be, in the sense of where's the work going to come from. 47% of jobs predicted to be automated in the next 20 years according to Oxford University. Andrew McAfee talks about similar kind of stats in their book. But what I've seen happening more recently are two things. One is, if you look at the app economy in Europe alone, it's produced in the last 5 years 1 million new jobs. The whole shortage of skilled people in the science, technology, engineering roles. We've got 20,000 engineering vacancies right now in the UK that remain unfilled. And the other trend which has really taken a pace, and The Economist featured that in their cover story at the beginning of the year, which is the freelancification of work, the idea of work on demand. So there might not be as many jobs. Organizations are employing fewer and fewer people, but there's an awful lot of work. And the final thing which encourages me is that people are just not having enough children. So, the baby boomer generation is coming to retirement, and there's a shortage of people coming through in terms of demographics in developed countries. And so we really got this skills gap and this demographic gap. So I think that the future for work is rich.
Well, Paul, is freelancification a good thing? Is it good that companies are going to, not be paying benefits and not having long-term contracts with people, and that every person is kind of out on their own as an individual kind of lone ranger trying to get their various contracts with various companies? Is that a good thing? I tend to think that companies increasing employee engagement and having really effective workforces is a good thing. So how is freelancification a good thing, or is it?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a huge change, and therefore it sort of comes with its upsides and its downsides. What I would say is, and I was listening to a podcast that talked about this only yesterday, is that the freelancification is particularly difficult in the U.S. market because so much of what people want is healthcare security. And so that's really a very much a U.S. issue that's really affecting, I think, the U.S. economy and the shape of the jobs market. I mean, if across Europe, the provision of healthcare is really quite different. So being freelance in Europe is far easier to do.
Oh, fascinating.
But the other thing that I would just say on that is that people want flexibility, options, choice, and that there is a security in being an independent worker, a freelancer, if your skills and network are strong. And I think all the predictions around work are that people will go through, I think, maybe 30 or 40 different organizations they'll work for in their work life, and maybe more.
Wow, sounds exhausting.
And the other thing that seems like it might be exhausting, with all this change of kind of how we work and where we work, what jobs consist of, etc., is leading in this world. And, you've got very personal experience of that with leading Digital Workplace Group and kind of other leaders you're talking to. What would you say about that?
Well, I mean, in the past, the whole idea of management by walking around was the way that you made your presence felt. And it's not that the physical side of work and the meeting and being seen around the organization isn't important. I heard an interview with Matt Mullenweg, who's the CEO of Automatic, who run WordPress. And there's 300 people in that company, and he spends an awful lot of his time going around meeting different people inside Automatic, even though they don't have offices. But the ability now in the digital workplace to be felt and to make your presence felt across the organization is so much more available. You simply cannot get across an organization of 200,000 people, but you can do if you're using tools like Yammer, Chatter, if you're doing Q&A online, recording audio, etc. And the other thing is that leaders are now able, through the social media outside the organization, and Richard Branson, who's featured in this slide here and mentioned in the book, is able to kind of cross over these different aspects of the kind of virgin world. So I know that I found in my own work, there's only 80 people in the digital workplace group, is that, I can be on a train, I can be anywhere, and through going on the Yammer network within the team, on the Yammer network that we have with our customers, through Twitter, through LinkedIn, within half an hour you can really reach out and be heard and connect with people in a way that's physically impossible.
It's interesting we're on this learning curve, leaders are, and all of us, in terms of, how do we navigate this digital world? And it can seem like, we hear all about how amazing digital is, it's going to kind of save the world and all these things. But there's actually a balance to that in terms of some of the issues that we're experiencing and how we as individuals and also as organizations are learning to deal with those.
Yeah, and sometimes I think one or two people have I don't know if they've accused me of over sort of digital optimism or just kind of passion and enthusiasm, but I'd like to think I'm kind of realistic about it as well. I do think what the digital renaissance in the workplace offers is generally a very positive picture. However, there are downsides, and organizations like ourselves, where we don't have any offices, working from home's sort of fine up to a point, but there's the whole isolation that can come from not seeing your colleagues as much. So I think there's kind of issues of how you build connection and community and engagement between each other in the digital workplace. The other thing is that, and everybody kind of resonates with this one, don't they, is around digital addiction. If you enjoy your work more and it's permanently available to you, there's always that trend, that tendency, that desire to connect in, to check things, and so on. And I think, we need to develop our own kind of habits around that. For me, that means I don't work in the evening or the weekend, on holidays. I'll just check in twice a day, and I don't expect to connect with people inside the company outside of their working hours. And we try as the digital workplace group to, if you like, try and have a model of some standards and policies and practices around this.
Well, Paul, as someone who works for the digital workplace group, I think that this very much connects to the previous slide, the previous chapter about leading in the digital workplace. I think that leadership by example is the most potent type of leadership. And what I see as a DWG employee is that you and other executives in the company, you're not sending emails at all hours of the night. You're not working on the weekends. If you go on holiday, you go on holiday. And you actually set examples of how to balance your work life and your digital life with the rest of your life, and that's absolutely critical for leadership in the digital age, I think. And I get the sense that a lot of companies don't have that same leadership by example around digital working.
But when you kind of feed it back to me like that, and thanks for saying that, Ephraim, it's not that difficult, though, is it? Setting a few boundaries around when you communicate and when you, when you feed it back, it doesn't sound that difficult to do.
And I know sometimes people might say, oh, well, you're a smaller company, it's easier. But, you get examples like Deutsche Telekom with their smart device policy, and they've actually said, there are communication-free zones that employees can set. So I think we're seeing some great practices coming out of actually companies of all sizes in this area.
I would say, Elizabeth, actually, that I think, there's a lot of criticism comes up for the works councils in Germany because they can be quite strident in their views. That they represent the employee population. But I also think that the German approach to having more separation between work and life, some of the corporate policies that are emerging are really good ones, and they're really kind of saying that we don't want to have a free-for-all here. We're aware that you can work 24/7, but that's not a healthy, productive, and sustainable way to work. And I think we can learn a lot from them.
Yeah. So, we're all learning really at high speed about how to navigate this world, and all of us on this call really are, as Brian Solis says in the preface, anyone can be a digital leader. So as we're stepping up to that, there's also a big question about how are we preparing the next generations, who are going to come into a workplace very different to what we see today. How do you think we're doing on that front?
Well, I think the education system in most countries at the moment, at school education, has been constructed in an industrial age model. So in order to feed the industrial machine, the manufacturing processes, the factories, the offices, you needed to basically have a replicable model. So the teacher stood at the front and everybody sat in rows. And I think there's been kind of flexing around content and interaction, but essentially it hasn't changed fundamentally. And I do kind of wonder, as I was walking this morning, I saw school kids dressed in their uniforms with heavy backpacks going off to their workplace while the parents head back home, with the benefits of flexible working. And it feels to me like the adult workplace has been changing faster than the workplace of their children. And I'm not suggesting that, entirely flexible ways of educating should mean we kind of disband schools. But, this whole idea of flipping the classroom, where people using Khan Academy and other online learning tools can learn better when they're not in school than when they are in school. And why learn from a only moderate teacher at your school when you can go online and learn from a world-class teacher online? So I think that there's a whole revolution in the way education is formatted that's needed. I think there's a lot of threat also in the gap in terms of skills. Are we producing knowledge that can be just discovered through Google anyway, or are we producing people with the adaptability to work in the freelanced world that Ephraim quite rightly found so kind of threatening and exhausting to hear described? What kind of skills are you coming into the workplace with? And I really do admire these stories that are emerging of children at school forming their own companies, setting up blogs, YouTube channels. There's increasing numbers of kids leaving school earning more than their parents. Who would have thought it?
Yeah, it's exciting. I mean, this whole area around education is very hotly debated, and I feel like it's one, as digital workplace professionals, that we do need to engage in and understand. For example, in my local town here in the UK, we're looking at setting up local groups around MOOCs in our library, so you get the best of digital and physical, and a lot of it is about that. But I know with this, as we move into the next chapter, Paul, you're kind of wrapping up this first section before we move into, what's the kind of roadmap for the digital workplace. What would be your words of wisdom as we leave this section?
Well, just that this is a unique period in work, and work was refashioned from an agricultural society into an industrial society in the late 1700s, early 1800s, and it's being refashioned and redesigned now. And there's tremendous opportunity to place human beings at the center of your digital world of work inside your organizations. It kind of feels to me like, Elizabeth, that the part of the book I wrote was the sort of easier part, the ideas, the concepts, and the vision of where this was going. And then you did the kind of hard work of actually saying, well, what does this really mean when the rubber hits the road? If you're a digital workplace manager, HR manager, in charge of collaboration inside an organization, what's the digital workplace journey? And I think what I love about the part of the book that you wrote is that you've given people a handbook, a roadmap, and a guide into that. So if I'm in a role inside an organization, and I'll flip the interview here and start asking you a few questions. How do I start on my own digital workplace journey?
Sure, and it's interesting that you say, about it being challenging. It was challenging, but the fortunate thing was I had the sort of background of the whole DWG team effectively through our research, through our benchmarking to really help to pull together this section. So, what I say at the start of chapter 10 is this is the opportunity to take a step back, say, wow, okay, we've got the sense of these bigger trends. They're important, they're exciting, but now what does that mean in my organization? So what we do in this first chapter, your digital workplace journey, is we take a look at some things like, the definition of the digital workplace and what that means, and kind of move on to a heuristic assessment of your own digital workplace capability. In terms of the definition, and I know there's a lot of discussion about this in the industry, and I think it's something that is important, but we shouldn't get hung up on. At a very basic level, we're talking about all of the digital tools that enable work to happen within organizations. But, we can't really just reduce this to a set of technology services. If we look at the impact, you've very much touched on, of the impact that the digital workplace is having, it's really far-reaching. And what we're seeing in all different industries is different kind of shapes and sizes of digital workplace program emerging, whether that's, kind of deep cultural change in Unilever with their agile workplace program, or something like Alaska Airlines putting, 5,500 pages of paper onto iPads to their airline pilots, or, I don't know, Mitsubishi Electric, putting augmented reality apps into the field. So that there's really different aspects to this. But
I mean, it's so fundamental, but is it still the case that people need to make a business case for investment in this area? And if they do, what are the areas that you think they should think about?
Yeah, absolutely. Getting a digital workplace program kind of on the rails is very, very significant piece of work. And where we start out in this chapter is looking at strategic alignment, which sounds so obvious, I almost don't want to say it. But, what we see so often and hear so often is that there's that kind of disconnect between intranet digital workplace and what the organization is trying to achieve. So we revisit that at the start. And kind of with that firmly in our minds, we start to look at a collection of different examples that we've pulled together. Anything from, Shell in cost optimization, looking at kind of over $1 million savings through platform consolidation, through to it could be, AT&T with their knowledge portal, increasing sales revenue. So it pulls together a whole lot of different examples of the benefits the organizations are already reaping from great digital workplace programs.
And I heard about an example of a well-known German company a couple of days ago, and interestingly enough, what they had done in quite a non-traditional way is that they said, we need to transform our digital workplace because we need to transform our digital workplace. They said, we don't need a business case for this. It's just so fundamental to our future.
Paul and Elizabeth, I think that when it comes to the business case and ROI and value and things like that, there are two very different approaches, and maybe you can speak to this. One is this idea of the overall digital workplace and recrafting the overall employee experience of work as it's delivered through digital channels. But then this other piece is that you don't necessarily have to revamp your entire digital workplace. You can find a specific problem area that's linked to the business's goals and strategy and make improvements so that this particular piece of the digital workplace is now working much better and delivering higher value. What can you say about these two very different approaches and maybe how they fit together?
Well, yeah.
You go ahead, Elizabeth.
And we come on to that as well in Chapter 12. It's a really good point, Ephraim. And, it's going to be different for different organizations. And when you're looking at scoping the program, there could be different ways of kind of deciding which chunk you bite off first. So that could be, a platform that's gone out of support. So that clearly needs to be addressed first. But it's very much about the kind of focus is, we already have a digital workplace. So it's not something, we're not working from scratch here. We already have the kind of materials that we're working with. And for some organizations, what we've seen in Barclays, they've actually got a separate kind of transformation team. They're seeing very fundamental need to transform their digital workplace, just as they're making external transformation as well. So they're very broad vision and also moving fast. So there isn't kind of one size that fits everybody.
Mm. And Elizabeth, when you're thinking about the kind of nature and structure of the digital workplace, taking this analogy and this comparison with the physical world, do we need standards, kind of policy? In the physical world, we have health and safety. We have, you don't just build a building kind of in a kind of chaotic way, in a fragmented way. And let's face it, a lot of digital workplaces can feel like that at the moment. So how do you approach the design side of this?
Yeah, this is something we've really drilled into in our research and which I've kind of pulled through in this chapter. And it's, there's very few organizations thinking about the user experience of the whole digital workplace. And we kind of tend to see these very fragmented environments and really kind of frustrating experiences. And even where, potentially one element, maybe the intranet has been quite well designed, it's typically been designed for people on desktops and, we're seeing kind of a lot of mobile kind of efforts as well. But so what we look at in this chapter is partly we look at, what are the impacts, and we talk about user experience debt, building up anything from kind of, lower adoption of new services right through to actually difficulties around attracting and retaining talent. And I know you talk about digital disappointment as well. And then we look, a lot of this is about really fundamental issues around strategy and governance, which kind of underpin this. So you can't just address user experience on its own. But here we do look at what are the standards do you need to have in place. We look at, for example, a procurement checklist around, bringing in new tools. What should you be looking at? And then we talk about the actual interventions that you can make, and we talk about this distinction, which kind of was first of all from our researcher Chris Tubb talked about, the distinction between the designed and non-designed digital workplace, and about different strategies you need for different elements where you have basically more or less control.
Mm. Yeah, and one of the things that I was just thinking about relative to that, and I was hearing about it the other day, and this is not a promo for this technology, but if you look at something like Slack, which has been getting an awful lot of attention as a kind of technology platform, it really does. A lot of the reasons why people like it is to do with the design, the smoothness, the beauty of the platform, and I think that's really so critical in creating an environment that people actually want to work in. And when you're setting up a digital workplace program, Elizabeth, could you give us an example of the kind of process that people need to go through and anybody who's done that particularly well?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about earlier about how do you scope this, where do you start? And I mean, one of the case studies we look at in the book is Virgin Media, and the way they started it out was we just want to make simple things that employees are trying to do, like kind of make calls through their laptop or kind of collaborate on spreadsheets. We want to make those things really easy. So they actually started, and to get engagement, they just tried to make employees' life easier. So that was, they had a broad vision for their digital workplaces, you see when you kind of get into the case study. But that was the angle. And, one of the things we look at here is, kind of putting in place that strategy and approach. But we talk a lot about how do you get the kind of cross-functional involvement to really get it off the ground. And we see that as being really, really critical to making it work. So Virgin Media, again, a great example of how they've brought people together around the table. And also, I mean, you mentioned IKEA as well. just the process of walking around the organization, having the conversations. What do we understand by digital workplace? What does it mean for our organization? And what can it really do for us? So that kind of engagement piece is something that we touched on quite a lot in this chapter.
Great. And I mean, one of the things that we've always wanted to do is make sure you have proper metrics, proper measurement. You know, how do you? I mean, it was hard enough trying to measure and evaluate intranets. How do you do that relative to the digital workplace?
I'm afraid I can't say that it gets any easier. Quite the opposite. But you know, we've seen this, and again, another area we've researched quite deeply is around the metrics piece, and still generally the tools for measurement tend to be more immature on the inside of the organisation. So that is an issue, but it's, you know, at the outset of the digital workplace programme, one aspect is we look at, as we looked at in Chapter 10, is doing something like that heuristic assessment that gives you a general understanding of this is our capability now. That's basically a subset of our wider digital workplace maturity benchmark, which goes into more depth. That's like a level set. So at the program level, it means that in a year, 18 months, whatever it is, we can return to that and really understand the big picture. It's also focusing in on, you know, the kind of metrics and KPIs that are really going to be relevant for the program, depending on, you know, what is the exact focus of your program and at this time. So we explore that and we look at examples from Unilever is one of them in this chapter, who have really done that very well. So they have a very holistic measurement program which, you know, tracks and reports on results at kind of different levels of their program. And the other thing that we talk about here is around storytelling. So, you know, you talk about the digital renaissance. This is very much about humans and kind of the elements of meaning and passion. So we talk about bringing those metrics to life and using storytelling very much. And the other thing in this chapter is, you know, it's not that we're going to reach some kind of desired end game for the digital workplace. So we're going to be continually evolving and iterating what we're doing. Without the real metrics, how are we going to do that?
You know, Elizabeth, we've had a question come in. It's not about metrics and measurement per se, but Allison Freer has asked, what advice would you give to project teams made up of large organizations and smaller consultancy or external partners who want and need to collaborate effectively as a virtual team? So if you have maybe a large organization that's trying to accomplish something and it has other external agencies it needs to work with, how do they work effectively?
I mean, I guess this describes, you know, you mentioned at the beginning I work very closely with our consulting business. And when we're going in, it's very much about establishing these kind of really fruitful, deep working relationships. Sometimes a lot of that we do virtually, but one of the learnings for me is really about, at the right moments, knowing when to bring the team together physically. It doesn't have to be very often, but to get that quality of interaction there. So I think that's important. And also, you know, it's thinking about that relationship over time. So, you know, next week we're going into one of our member meetings, and we're going to a member who, I think back to 2010, we heard about their kind of the plans for their one intranet project. Now they've implemented it. You know, now we're seeing the fruits of that. So it's kind of going on we've really been on a journey with them as we've benchmarked them, seen them evolve. So I think about it very much about that relationship building.
Yeah, I would probably say that, you know, the question is really showing that you need to be thinking about how the interaction and the communication is going to happen. You know, what tools are you going to use? Is it possible that you can have a shared network like Chatter or Yammer that you're both working on, or can you both share SharePoint or Jive, etc.? Can you create the communication channels and, you know, frequency of audio and video conferencing, some protocols around how you're going to do that, because often the team can't physically meet, but there are ways that you do need to make sure that you build up relationship. You know,
we've just got another question that I think is actually a really great follow-up from Mike Sokol on the line. Is your vision of a digital workplace universal in nature? Is it viewed differently based on where you are, for instance, Asia versus South America, EMEA versus U.S., etc.?
Can I answer that one, Elizabeth? I mean,
sure.
I think that the digital workplace it's like the internet, but applied to work. It's a pervasive digital geography that wraps our planet, and I don't think that the ways of working and the cultural differences are sufficiently different around the world for it to be, in a way, to have its own iteration in one place and not another. We work with quite a lot of different global organizations, and we don't see great differences. I think that's one of the benefits of a digital workplace that's universal in nature, as Mike puts it so eloquently, is that it creates a uniform world, and there is a kind of a sort of a democratizing effect that happens through the internet, and I think the same process is happening in the digital workplace.
Paul, I think something that actually speaks a bit to Mike's question is that next week on Digital Workplace Live on Tuesday, we're going to have a live tour from AmBank, which is a bank based in Malaysia with 11,000 employees. They've been Digital Workplace Live subscribers. They've been watching all the live tours, and they're looking at how to advance from an intranet perspective to a digital workplace strategy and what we call an intranet-led digital workplace. So I think the reality is that we're all using digital technology everywhere, and we're seeing very much so that companies throughout the world are focused on this. There are obviously cultural differences in how to use, online social tools and things like that, and how to communicate effectively. But the digital workplace concept seems to be very common around the world.
And I think, because of course we do have to take in those cultural differences in how we work in different geographies and different parts of the organization. And they are important, but there is that possibility, as Paul said, to kind of come together. And I think that's also about establishing a common language at the start. So, what do we mean by digital workplace for our organization, as I said earlier? And maybe digital workplace isn't quite the right term in your organization. It's about really establishing, I mentioned with IKEA kind of walking around, having lots of conversations, but they just went round and asked and found out what people understood. And that's really helped them to have a kind of a very authentic, a very down-to-earth approach in their program.
And Mike put in a great follow-up question. Certain economies are more advanced than others. Do you see specific economies leapfrogging other economies because of their adoption of digital workplace approaches? That's a fascinating question.
Well, I think we definitely see that happening in the consumer world. You see it happening on the internet side. I think there are potential problems of connectivity, bandwidth, the quality of the digital environment. I'm sure it's the same in the US, but you can travel around the UK and it can be pretty kind of patchy depending on where you are. You can go to Finland and find much higher power to the digital workplace there and the digital environments. So it's something certainly to kind of watch. And wouldn't it be great if some of the underdeveloped countries were able to provide and enjoy better digital workplace connectivity than we have in, say, European countries?
Yeah, and I guess because a lot of countries that don't have a developed infrastructure have kind of in some ways leapfrogged to mobile phones, what we could see is that in some countries, mobile intranets, mobile elements of the digital workplace are actually taking priority over the desktop or laptop experience of the digital workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, to be honest, these are they're devices that are just transitions. So in a way that this kind of digital workplace journey will flow through whatever comes after mobile, comes after tablet, wearable technologies, implanted technologies, and so on. But I think the important thing is to think about, as people are trying to do in the UK, they're building high-speed train links in the physical world. Are we building high-speed digital infrastructure to power the economy in the same way? And I think each country needs to be asking that, because that's as important as the transportation system.
Yeah. Well, before we wrap up and hear some final thoughts from you, Paul and Elizabeth, I just want to let the folks on the line know a few things that are coming up. One is that the Digital Workplace Group is donating a membership to one global nonprofit. We have 3 finalist nonprofits, and our members are voting upon which of those 3 will win the final membership for 2015. On March 3rd, next week, Tuesday, we'll be doing Digital Workplace Live with a live tour from AmBank and a special guest from Apps for Good, a nonprofit, a global nonprofit that actually is working on teaching underserved youth how to develop apps and how to kind of understand the business around app development. And related to Digital Workplace 24, Paul, DWG has made a donation to Apps for Good, so we're excited to hear from them on March 3rd. Then we also have 2 DWG member meetings coming up in March, one in London, one in New York. And everybody, please go ahead and mark your calendars in advance. Digital Workplace 24 on May 20th and 21st. It's going to be a very exciting event for people around the world involved in intranets and the digital workplace. So as a final question, Paul and Elizabeth, kind of what do digital workplace teams need to be doing now or thinking now, and what do intranet teams need to be doing and thinking right now? What's their next step based on where we see the industry and where we see the average company?
I think,
Elizabeth?
well, I would say kind of getting that conversation started. I know I've said it before, but and as well as the strategic alignment piece, understanding how are people working. I mean, we talk about digital workplace. Eventually, the kind of digital will disappear. We're just talking about workplace. We're talking about how people work. So it's really understanding what is it people are trying to do now, and how is digital either helping or hindering. And I think there's an urgency actually in 2015 growing around that to get that digital workplace program onto the rails.
Yeah, and I think I would add a particular passion of mine is, what can the digital workplace mean for the mobile frontline inside your organization, for the traditionally digitally disempowered, the people in frontline retail, frontline logistics, frontline manufacturing, putting the power of the organization in the palm of their hands, giving the knowledge and information of the organization to them where they are. And that can be an incredible transformation, as we've seen at places like Zara and at Barclays, and it can happen inside your organization too. Great.
Well, Paul and Elizabeth, thank you so much for spending your time with us today. Thank you to everyone who tuned in and joined and asked questions today. This has been a fascinating webinar, some really fascinating topics that are, I think, pertinent to this audience, but pertinent to pretty much all the companies out there that we come in contact with, virtually every company that has more than one employee. So thank you, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Paul and Elizabeth. And for those on the line, please feel free to join us for Digital Workplace Live next Tuesday, and mark your calendars for Digital Workplace 24, May 20th and 21st. Thanks so much, and have a great day.